Hello, good evening, everybody, and welcome to the legendary Roxie Theater in San Francisco. We are so delighted to have you part of this, our seventh Quick Takes program. And this is a particularly interesting program for me, who, by the way, is Diana Fuller, and I am the chair of the nonprofit Roxie board. So I wanted to say that it's with great pleasure tonight that I bring you this program because every member is a great friend and a most respected friend in part of my own life story. So thank you for joining us. And I wanted to just give you a brief idea of what's going to happen here. We'll have 30 minutes of moderated conversation, and then it will be open to audience questions. And I think you can type the questions into the chat column, but they will describe that sort of later. Mostly what I want to do is with it is a great pleasure to introduce you to the award-winning directors and producers, Dan Geller and Dayna Goldfine. And briefly, they have jointly created critically acclaimed multi-character documentary narratives for a long time. And they braid their characters in these individual personal stories to form a much larger portrait of the human experience. I'm sure you know their most recent film, The Galapagos Affair, Satan Came to Eden. This was 2013, and what a story. I mean, it starts like a big, wonderful landscape, environmental thing, and wow, then it opens up into all sorts of strange things that happen. So if you haven't seen it, it's worth seeing. They have many credits, but I will leave that for later to also introduce you to another great friend and another most admired friend, I should say, Davia Nelson. To have them all here on this program is quite phenomenal. Um, she is half of the Peabody Award-winning producing team, which you know, the Kitchen Sisters, and they're heard on NPR and their podcast, The Kitchen Sisters, present. And their series include The Keepers, Hidden Kitchens, The Hidden World of Girls, and more. She co-wrote and produced the feature Imaginary Films starring Harvey Keitel and co-directed and produced the PBS documentary Making Tutti. She will be the person hosting the conversation, and it is with huge pleasure that I turn over this program to her now for her leadership in the evening. So here we go, Davia.
Well, thank you, Diana, and thanks to the Roxie, one of the nation's oldest cinemas, for gathering us together tonight, as it has decade after decade after decade, to watch the work of remarkable independent filmmakers. Welcome, everyone. For some 30 years, Emmy Award-winning directors and producers Dayna Goldfine and Dan Geller have been in collaboration on the set, behind the camera, in the editing room, the kitchen, you get the picture. This husband and wife filmmaking team roam the world together, chronicling life and its rituals, life in its extremes, life as it commences into adulthood, life and its most beautiful of expressions, dance and music. A few of their titles will just let you know. I mean, all of you who are with us know this already, but we'll let you know how wide-ranging their visions are. The Galapagos Affair, Satan Came to Eden, as Diana said, the Ballet Russe, a lyrical film about a group of the world's greatest ballet dancers, now in their 80s and 90s, reuniting in a reflection of their lives lived in art. Something Ventured, about the birth of venture capital and the origins of Silicon Valley. Kids of Survival, the art and life of Tim Rollins and KOS. And their second film, the film that we're going to talk about this evening, FROSH, 9 Months in a College Dorm, which Dayna just told me right before we went live, premiered at the Roxie in 1993. There is so much more to say about them and their work, so let's get to it. Welcome, Dan and Dayna.
Thank you, Davia.
It's such an honor to be here. And I have to say, in the midst of COVID, it's so unbelievable to see everyone's faces. That's such a surprise. I was thinking we were just going to see people's names. So I'm just like glowing. Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you for tuning in and showing us your gorgeous faces.
I think we could just kind of stay for 5 minutes in gallery view and just look at each other
I
and
know, it's just
savor each other's presence.
Oh,
But
yes.
I also, in a half hour, we're going to try, I mean, we could just go full on 1 hour of stay and chat, and everybody ask. This group of people knows Dan and Dayna well. Many of you, those of you who don't, probably have so many other questions for them too, but I'll take the first half hour. We're also, just a little show of hands, how many people have seen FROSH? How many of you have already seen it? How many saw it some 20 years ago? How many saw it in the last week? How many didn't see it because you didn't realize you were supposed to see it? Yeah, okay. So it's a kind of all over the map kind of a thing, in that Roxie kind of a way, right? So
Yes.
let us, here's a couple of this news flash. Lex just figured out, Lex Sloan, executive director of the Roxie, and Ariel, who we thank, who've helped produce tonight, decided to extend the time that FROSH is going to be up on the Roxie site until January 21st. Lex, I think that's very poetic. It's one night past the inauguration. So people, I think there's going to be a big rush to it on the 21st. Personally, that's my guess. But we are going to show 3 clips tonight in case you didn't see it, or just to remind you, or just to spring off of. So that's part of the tonight as well. So I wanted to ask, just to kick things off, what inspired you to make this film, to embed in a freshman dorm for 9 months in 1990-91?
Sure.
So when I was a student at Stanford, I actually was fortunate enough to get to be an RA in that exact same freshman dorm for 2 years. And I kept regaling Dan with stories about what life was like. And when we finished our first documentary, which was really a straight ahead history film about Isadora Duncan, we started toying with the idea of maybe trying to do a fiction film. And at that time, it wasn't that far removed from Animal House. And we were like, what if we did something based on the experiences that I had in a freshman dorm? And it could be like Animal House from a woman's perspective. And then as we started writing down the things that had really happened, we turned to each other at a certain point and said, you know what, this should be a documentary. No one would believe that those characters would go to Stanford necessarily, that there would be that mix of people. And so I arranged to have coffee with my old boss, who had been, my mentor when I was an RA. And I broached the subject to her thinking she would say no. And instead she was like, I think we will make that happen. So,
you were even more sneaky and clever about it with her, with Alice Upton, because I think you told her when she asked what would be up next, you told her a couple of other ideas we had, and then you said, oh, and by the way, there's this other thing we were thinking of, like, what if we could be in the freshman dorm for a year? So sort of buttering her up with distractions this way and that way, which was clever.
But she immediately leapt on it. And I think it was such an unusual time. I mean, it's hard to imagine, but in 1989, when we first broached the subject, it was before the real world. There really wasn't a lot going on. I mean, when people started writing about the film when it was in process, the only thing that they could kind of compare it to was Michael Apted's first couple 7-Ups, and An American Family, which was this ancient PBS series. And so we actually had a few reporters that followed us around the first couple weeks because they were so perplexed about why a film about life in a college, why any filmmakers would do this. So it was a novel idea at the time. And now, of course, we all take it for granted.
And what was it that you were saying to those reporters when they would say, so why are you doing this? What was your little tag?
Well, we had put it out there. It's in the sort of preamble to the film too, that it's an American rite of passage. It's uniquely American. Most students going into a beginning college year or in the rest of the world have had some experience away from home before. And the American rite of passage at a residential college for most kids who haven't been to a boarding school or prep school, for most kids, it's the first time away from school, the first time away from home rather, and the first time away from family, from all the safety and security and homogeneity typically that they were accustomed to. And drop them into a pressure cooker, into a concrete dorm, and turn up the pressure and see what happens. We knew that in that case we would see people having to confront each other's differences, usher each other through the changes. It would be the source of basically an entering into adulthood.
You two were the camera that never sleeps, the witness that is always there. I mean, sometimes you're just melting into the furniture and we're never aware of your presence. And sometimes we hear you asking a question, or you see the frosh bouncing themselves off of you. I wonder what was your method? How did you go about filming?
So our thought was, again, it's hard to fathom, but in 1990, it was pre-reality TV. People didn't have cell phones with cameras on them. For the most part, people didn't even have camcorders. So we were the ones with the cameras, and people weren't accustomed to being on camera. So our thought was, let's just be there 24/7. We hired, the only time that we didn't shoot ourselves was on the arrival day. We actually hired 3 cinematographers, and then Dan and I worked with one, and actually Barry Minot worked with the other, and did sound. And because our thought was, let's not meet these 80 students with a camera in front of our faces. But let's be there when they get their room key, so that their experience of their first year at college is inseparable from us being there. And in fact, at the end of the year, we asked all of them, how do you think we impacted your freshman year? And to a person, they said, we don't know, because we can't imagine, having experienced our first year at school without you guys, because you were just embedded.
Also, as far as the method, we spent, I would say, for every minute of film we shot I think 250 hours ultimately. We probably spent, for every hour, let's say, we probably spent about 30 hours not shooting, just in the dorm. Camera's always on the lap, sitting in a lap, microphone is around there, but just hanging out and getting to know the gang, and getting to really be part of the fabric of their daily life. That was so much of it. And we didn't light anything. We knew if we started to light a dorm up, it would just get too theatrical. All we did was we bought a whole bunch from Home Depot, or whatever the antecedent of Home Depot was, clip-on lamps. So if any of the students showed up and didn't have a clip-on lamp for their desk, we would just give them one and clip it on. And we had a huge supply of light bulbs, so that if a bulb blew out, we'd always sort of check and put another bulb in. And that was it. We would just turn on a couple of gooseneck lamps and have kind of cross key lighting, as subtle as possible, with a relatively high-end, but at that point primitive camera. And then when we'd slowly pick up the camera and put it on the shoulder, by and large, people would not alter their behavior. They wouldn't suddenly become self-conscious and clam up or perform for the camera.
Well, and in fact, so 80 students lived in the dorm. It was 40 men and 40 women. And we didn't know anything about them except what would fit on a little 5x7 card. So, we knew their names. Some of them had said like what the last book they'd read was, but for the most, we knew where they were from. But so we started filming during freshman orientation. There's like a week of that before school starts. And we kind of shot all 80 of them. I mean, we just didn't know. And then, after a couple weeks, we kind of figured out that there were a few dozen that were probably going to come to the fore. And a lot of it was based on who was natural in front of the camera. There were some obvious kind of show-offs, camera hogs in the beginning that I think thought that they were going to be the stars. And those were not obviously the people we were looking for. And a lot of it was also, whose room is open a lot? Like, what room tends to have people congregate in it? And obviously we were looking for a diverse group of students, but that kind of fell out pretty naturally.
It
Like
did.
all of a sudden, like a month into the project, we were like, wow, there's about 16 people that we could focus on, and they're pretty diverse, not just ethnically, but geographically and in terms of social class. So yeah, and at that point, about a month in, we went to each of those 15 people and said, you've probably noticed that we're really focusing on you guys. How do you feel about that?
And we also at that point said if they were willing to continue on with us, we would ask something from them and they could ask something from us. We said they had to stick with us at that point. They couldn't then bail out halfway through the school year. And that anytime any of them felt that in the moment they didn't want us to film, or after we had shot something that they felt uncomfortable with, they could tell us, no go, it never will see the light of day. And we agreed. We said that's fine. And it only happened once, and not even with one of the main people. She's still a dear friend of ours, but I think part of it was the trust we had earned just by being there, and they began to understand us and began to understand our authenticity and our how we were going to be careful with their stories and with their lives. We were also, I mean, I didn't have any gray hair then, probably just a little bit. We were the cool older people.
That's what they literally called us, the cool old people. And it's
With
funny.
a covenant. And,
What's that?
and a covenant. You did
Yes. So Dan turned 30 that year and I turned 32. And so I just remember with such delight the year that they all turned 32. And we were still friends with a lot of them. And I took such pleasure from saying, guess what? You just turned the year that I was when we were filming you. And it was just unfathomable to them. But the other thing is when we asked these, say, dozen or so people, in the end, the film focuses on 10, if they felt comfortable with being the focal points of this film. At the same time that they said, yeah, yes, that's fine. We also said, and by the way, can we come home with you during winter break? Now you got to get on the phone with your parents and ask if we can follow you home.
Yeah, it is a sort of a chain reaction. Okay, we're gonna set up a clip now. And I guess one thing I noticed in your film, it's 1990, 91, issues of homophobia, of racism, of feminism are so at the center of what these students are thinking about. The burning issues of them are the burning issues of now. I mean, there are so many others as well, but that really struck me. And I wonder if you might set up the clip, the Sam and Debbie clip we're about to see.
Yeah, sure. And by the way, those issues, I think that these days it's less a question of homophobia and more a question of a broader spectrum of sexual orientation and sexual identity. Although a lot of the same questions and concerns are going to come up if you're encountering that for the first time. But this clip, so Sam from Short Hills, New Jersey, and Debbie from Trumbull, Connecticut, are just these open-minded, open-hearted, and just wonderfully sweet people, both of them. There isn't a hard edge to either of them. And they had a nice friendship. They were not, involved romantically or anything, but they had a lovely friendship. And of course, one thing that starts to happen in college freshman year, even back 30 years ago, is these questions of identity, these questions of groups, these questions of tolerance, and also past grievances begin to emerge and are not just contained to a classroom or the midterm paper. They come up everywhere. And so this is a moment where Sam and Debbie are in the lounge of the dorm. They're the only two ones there. And as with so many scenes in FROSH, this thing just happened to start up right where we were there, just to get a little shot of the lounge.
Right, we were just getting some B-roll. And we thought, oh, it's kind of cool that one person's sitting on one couch and one sitting on the other, and we'll just get a wide shot of the room. The other little piece that you need to know is that especially if you didn't watch the film, for Sam, who wears his heart on his sleeve, one of the things that he says very early on in the film, and that he said very early on that year, in sort of an abashed way, was he's never had a girlfriend. And his greatest desire, one of his greatest desires that year, was to finally have a girlfriend. So just keep that in mind as the scene unfolds.
Let's roll them.
Sam,
Debbie?
do you feel like you're at a loss at the school of being a white male?
I'm a what?
At a loss?
At a loss at school being a white male?
Yeah.
Absolutely not.
Do you feel like at any other place you would be? Like getting a job you would be?
That I'm at a loss?
Yeah.
What do you mean, like discriminated against, or
Like
I don't understand things?
like
or-
if you were of color or like from a different country, it'd be easier to get into this school? Or it would be easier to get
A
a
little
job?
bit. Well, not really. I think there's still, I mean, as much as they like to crow about multiculturalism, there's still a lot of white males here.
So like when you hear people like protesting and people like asking for like multicultural houses and more integrated education, it doesn't bother you at all?
I think they have as much right to be different as I do from them.
Yeah, of course I do. I think they hate you though.
They hate me.
They hate
Well,
you.
that's too bad, because I don't hate them.
Well, that's wonderful. I'm not saying that each and every one does, but I think that's part of their group. That's part of the structure of their group.
I don't think they all hate me. Do you think all women hate me? No.
Yeah.
Really?
Killer diller, Debbie. Although, as you say, not a mean bone in her body. I said we were going to open this up to the chat questions at 6:30. So maybe let's just set up this next clip. So we've seen 2 chunks of the film. I think Meredith, I saw in chat, was maybe referring to Michael Apted, and I think Dayna, you did too. So maybe just a moment in honor of Michael Apted, who just died this last week.
Yes.
Yeah.
A wonderful filmmaker.
A huge,
Yes.
huge,
Just
like,
the scope of that man's work and
an icon.
pioneering of, yeah, I heard an interview where he said he was hoping that, I think 80 up or was going to be his thought of his last one. And anyway, so have you seen?
Oh my God.
So
Wait, Monique.
this next clip I'm about to say, so this next clip has Monique Reese in it, who is on this Zoom session tonight. An unexpected and wonderful treat. And by the way, Monique, except for this one COVID year, has come to Thanksgiving dinner every year since that year in 1990. She lives in Southern California now. So Monique.
Can I just say one thing? Seeing Monique's face makes me cry because the thing about doing this work as filmmakers is that it's really about the friendships that you make and the worlds it allows you to enter. And the most special thing about having spent that 9-month period is that we've ended up with amazing friendships that have now gone on for 30 years. And Monique, I can't tell you how much I've missed seeing you and how much I had counted on you being there for Thanksgiving. So love you.
So in this clip, which is a startling coming to terms with her own family, and there's some brokenness in that family in the midst of a sea of basically of innocent FROSH and white people not understanding how to react. By the way, we will circle around at the end of this hour to what happens to Monique in a clip in her senior year, which I think is fabulous. So this is a clip where again, one of these moments that came out of nowhere, as we were just in someone's room. This started it. I think that it needs no more setup than that.
Being present. Okay, let's roll.
Well, your mom's like on crack. That's pretty bad.
Couldn't concentrate anymore. So I tried to concentrate through an hour of working, and I don't know if I made it or not, but I couldn't.
Where is your mom?
I don't know.
Is she still on drugs?
I don't know.
What was the matter with her?
She was, maybe still is, like, majorly addicted to crack.
Mm-hmm.
And she's been doing that shit since, like, I just think she started when I was 13. It's a long time to be doing something, like, all day, all night, all day, all night, all day, all night. Yeah.
She in the hospital or something?
No. This is, I haven't seen her in, like, how old am I? 3 years? 2.5 years.
And she hasn't. Why hasn't she contacted you?
She doesn't know where I am. I mean, she knows, like, the number where I was in Dallas. That number's gone because my dad moved, and he like doesn't like her at all. I think that might have been one of the reasons why he.
How did they even find?
They weren't married.
They weren't.
No, she's married to my brother's dad still.
No, but your dad and your mom were never married. You're kidding. Your mom was married to another guy when.
She fucked my dad. Yeah.
Well, I didn't want to put. You went ahead and said it.
Well, that's what happened. So I wonder if she stopped. I wonder if she gained any weight. I wonder if she has a job. I wonder what she's doing. I wonder if she thinks about me.
Pretty revealing and honest and difficult for Monique to do. And then as hard as it is, and Monique, if you want to unmute yourself at some point, you can certainly talk about it. To see all these kids who have never encountered anything like this, who don't think they'll encounter something like this at a college like Stanford, speechless, probably for the first times in their lives.
Monique, do you want to say anything? You don't have to. I don't want to put you on the spot. It's just that I'm looking at your face.
Sorry, I wasn't prepared to say anything because this is your thing. I just wanted to support. I mean, if anyone has any questions, I'll answer, but I don't want to. But yeah, clearly by Ollie's face, mind blown.
And I feel like, Monique, people blew people's minds in many different levels that year, which is one of the reasons we wanted to do the film. I feel like you consistently did it. I feel like Nicholas, for sure. I think Sam's mind was blown all the time just by being around women for that whole year.
I did think of one thing though, is that I actually have a pretty decent relationship with my mother now. I do her taxes now.
That's so fantastic.
Monique is a bookkeeper, tax preparer, and I don't know, have you got your CPA yet?
No, I put off my last test because of COVID. So yeah, I still have one last portion to pass, but yeah. And yes, she was thinking about me. She wrote a letter to Stanford asking where I was, like trying to track me down. So she was thinking about me.
That's fantastic.
It's beautiful.
Wow.
Jesus, I feel like we could just like close it all up right there, but we'll go on.
All right. Welcome, Monique. So great to see you. And would you do my taxes as well, please? Are you starting to put out a shingle there? Okay, so let's get into questions from all of you. And let's see, there are 12 chats. Okay, let's see. Okay, I'm just gonna do a quick summation. Pat Loud of An American Family, Meredith again, just died last week. Lance was a dear friend. He invited American filmmakers back to film the end of his life. So people probably want to watch for that. And again, Meredith Brody talking about Michael being at Mill Valley with 63 up in 2019. Okay, my biggest question is, where are they now? Okay, we're going to get to that a little bit later. Barbara G, let's see, welcome everyone. Thank you for being here. Okay, do we have a question from you all? Because I've got 10 million. Well, we can start with where are they now? Let's just start with where are they now? And we're going to see, maybe you want to explain now and then as well while we're in this moment. Dayna.
Sure. So we actually hadn't, when we were filming FROSH and had decided to do that project, we hadn't considered doing a follow-up. And it was only, because we stayed so close. And FROSH started coming for Thanksgiving, and we saw them a lot sophomore year and junior year. And I think actually it was around their junior year that we started, they would say things to us about, oh, if you film me now, you would get such a different perspective, or, oh my God, you should check out Sam, he's now the big man on campus. So we just started thinking about it their junior year, and then we broached the topic. And so that is where Now and Then from FROSH to Seniors comes. And both of those are still they're going to be up on, again, they're up on the Roxie site. You can stream them for another week or so.
And I think we saw that the arc of that first year was an arc of beginning a process of reinvention, beginning a process of coming to a wider understanding of themselves and the world. But it was only a beginning. And so to touch base in senior year, to feel and see where those changes had started to manifest, that was interesting, because there were big changes. There were really interesting reversals that happened along the way. And of course, that was not the end of where everybody's story moved on. I mean, we talked over the years about doing follow-ups of the Michael Apted sort. And we'd always thought it would be interesting to do, but we were busy with other projects. And even more recently, you and I had said, oh, maybe.
When the FROSH had their 25th reunion, I was like, oh my God, I wish we could film that, just, because we have stayed in touch with most of them, really. And where people end up is just always fascinating. I just saw that someone asked a question about how we chose that particular dorm.
Yeah.
Stanford has a zillion different FROSH. We knew we wanted it to be a FROSH dorm and not a Fort class dorm. And so we basically got at least a tacit permission from Alice Supton, the head of residential life, in 1989. And we spent that year then meeting with all the different FROSH dorm staff, like the resident fellows. Most of them are like either professors or they're high-level staff at school at Stanford. And there was a handful of them that were excited about the idea. And then once we got a handful of yeses, then we looked at the configurations of each of the dorms, and we decided that, like the 180 person dorm was too big. The 45 person dorm was too small. So 80 felt like around a good number. And then the thing that was so cool about Trancos is that there was a floor of men and a floor of women and a co-ed floor. And so we didn't know if that would be an important thing, but we felt like, let's go for that.
Gave you a lot more possibilities.
We also, I remember during that first quarter when we were filming, we were asked to give a colloquium to education school graduate students. And they asked us what our methodology was. Was it what sort of quantitative work we were doing? We said, this isn't quantitative, this is qualitative. It's all about direct observation of experience. And then they said, well, then to what extent is Stanford and then the subjects of your film, to what extent are they going to have a hand in this? And we said, well, they don't have a hand in it. I explained to them the colloquium, what I said today in this session. And they said, do you mean you weren't asked to sign the human subjects research form, which would have handcuffed us? No one asked us. Maybe it was an oversight, or maybe it was a deliberate.
No, it was
Alice looking the other way, because we would have been subject to so many levels of review and not been able to make a movie that had any kind of I think depth and personality to it. So we got lucky.
I mean, I think it was such a matter of timing and knowing Alice. And Alice, I think part of it was that the president of Stanford at the time, Don Kennedy, it was pretty clear that he wasn't going to be there for much longer. And he was a very open-hearted, open-minded, open book kind of a president, very unique. And Alice and Norm, the heads of resident education, I think realized that when Don left, they were probably going to leave, and they had each spent 20 years building this program. So when Dan and I broached this idea, I think from their perspective, it was an opportunity to document it. And you know, to actually see if all the things that they had spent their lives, their work lives trying to foster were indeed happening, and to capture them. So they really, oh my God, they cut all the ribbons and tape and everything for us.
It is astounding when you look at the credits at the back of your film, how many people had to say yes in order for that film to be what it was. And they did say yes. So someone, was it Barry who, yeah, Barry says, how did you get the parents to agree to have their children filmed? Or was it getting the FROSH to agree? And how did you get the parents to agree to have the cameras in their homes? And how did you get every one of those professors and every one of those scenes? I mean, that's an epic amount of yes.
It was shocking because when the students got their orientation packets sent to their homes with all the details about how many pillows to bring and can you get a refrigerator, you know, that kind of stuff. So we put in a letter from the two of us describing the project and our backgrounds, and also had in there a release form because not everybody was of a major age of 18.
We didn't actually give them release forms for.
Oh, maybe
like,
you're right. We
no,
didn't
not
give them
till the
that. We
winter
didn't give them
quarter.
that. You're
Yeah.
right. So when we sent that out, and I know I'm confusing that with, we also said, look, you can get back in touch and say you don't want your child, if you're if you're still a guardian of the child, or the student themselves could send it back and say, I don't want to be part of this.
Or actually, you can move me out of the dorm.
Or even move out of the dorm.
Yes, yeah. So they did have that option because it was such an odd thing to suggest at the time.
But nobody said no. And at first I thought, did they not read the packet? Did they not get it? But nobody said no. And during the filming in those first few weeks, there were a few people who were never going to be the main focus of the film, who did say they'd rather not be shot, filmed at all. But there were very, very few. And then once we earned the trust of the kids, the parents were the easy part. The kids say, hey, Dan and Dayna, they're really cool. They're fine. Can they come home and stay? I mean, at Cheng's house, I remember his parents were Taiwanese immigrants, a successful restaurant they owned. And they just were fascinated. First of all, that was the first time they had any white people in their home and staying over. And my favorite was that they said, that Chinese and Jews have so much in common, an emphasis on education and adoration for food.
But Cheng's mom, Teresa, did ask why we wore shoes in the house. That was like her big conflict with us. Like, why are you wearing shoes in the house?
And if I'm not mistaken, you're barefoot during this interview. Is that right?
I am. I haven't worn shoes since COVID, basically, which for anyone who knows me is a shock because I collect shoes. Anyway.
Teresa lives. I'm going to jump to some of the questions. Rachel Rosen, this isn't specifically about FROSH, but I'm wondering how, if at all, the attacks on journalism in the past few years have influenced the way you think about your own projects in terms of being truthful, but leaving room open for artistic interpretation.
Ooh, that's a great question.
That is a juicy one.
And it's so interesting because Dan and I have been involved. We're both members of the Academy of Motion Pictures in the documentary branch, and we actually recently got into it with a group of friends all over the country, really, who were all sort of a little bit horrified and concerned that some of the documentary, the things that are being called documentary right now are actually flouting what we think is.
Well, they're creating circumstances instead of documenting them. They're creating artifice and not really even, artificial situations and putting people in them, which is very different than, in my view, an answer to your question would be, if we're observing something that's real, we haven't created a situation. I feel there's a lot of license at that point to get to the essence of something, and that there is, in my view, not a single truth when you're looking at within a documentary, when you're looking at something, because nobody's the reliable narrator. Some people may be more than others, and that's why, as both you and Diana mentioned in the intro, why we have these multi-character movies. For the most part, almost every single one we've done is multi-character, because the more voices that represent a situation or an experience, the more likely that throughout those contradictions and alignments, that an audience then would be able to say, well, here's my take on what was really going on. I do feel that we have a lot of license using music, using graphics, even sometimes, shuffling within a scene, the order of lines to get to the essence of something. So we're not strictly journalists. I think we've never, but I've certainly never aimed to be a journalist in the movies we make, but I do feel this this fundamental bond to not creating a circumstance, but rather representing a circumstance that exists.
I mean, when we were in the middle of FROSH, because even though we seemed like old people to the FROSH, we were still only 30, which feels like so young right now. And one of the most difficult aspects of living in that dorm and getting so attached, I mean, really, we didn't see anyone our age, like our peers, for 9 months. I mean, I remember once a couple friends of ours said, can we come over and have dinner in the cafeteria? Just like it would be this novelty. And we said, okay. And when the night came, we looked across the lawn that you would walk across to get to the cafeteria, and we saw these two old people, and we realized, oh wait, they're not old, those are our friends, and they're really only 30. So we just lost touch with, whatever our world would have been. But there were moments when we were hanging out where something would come up, and inside I would go, ooh, that's gonna hurt. Like, that person is gonna be wounded, or just from the vantage point of another 12 years, I could feel their pain. And so, but we really made a conscious decision that we were there to we loved them, and we were there as friends, and we would never hurt them knowingly, but we weren't allowed to like give them older person advice. And so I remember, like, junior year especially, I went out for coffee or lunch with Brandy, and she said, why the hell didn't you tell us that a lot of the stuff that we were being really neurotic about wasn't going to matter? And she's like, you must have known. And my response was, Brandy, first of all, you wouldn't have believed me, and secondly, that wasn't my right. And so, I mean, yeah, I think that was probably the hardest, like, regular emotional complication.
I remember there was a time, one moment in particular, with Shane, who began to study, or her major in feminist studies. She was raised very devout Catholic, and those came colliding into her mind. And it was an Ash Wednesday, she decided she was going to leave the church. And she started to talk about this within a group in her dorm with 2 or 3 other women. And it was breaking down. I mean, it was just so hard for her to admit to this, to decide to do this. And I remember literally crying into the viewfinder, because I had the camera down this way, crying into that viewfinder, think I just want to reach out and hug her, because this is such an important thing. And I thought, I can't do it. I can't do that. And she did have her friends there who did that for her. But it was one of these moments of, ouch.
Yeah, like do you pick up the camera and film, or do you hug that person? And actually that Shane scene is one that's that was really haunting at the time, because what happened is I didn't know anything about Catholicism before we started filming, and a bunch of, like, Sam and Shane and a couple other FROSH were very devout and went every Sunday morning, and so Dan and I went and filmed them, and I started kind of figuring out some things about Catholicism. And the one thing that I did know, because so many of them had ash on their head that Wednesday, it was Ash Wednesday. So later that night, we were sitting in Shane's room, and I all of a sudden noticed that she did not have ash on her head like everyone else did. And I said really innocently, Shane, where's your ash? And that's when she started crying. Yeah. And that's when the scenes started unfolding. And so I felt horrible. Like, it was a totally innocent question, and I was really curious about it. And then again, having asked that question, instead of hugging her, which is what I really wanted to do, like, picked up my microphone, Dan picked up his camera, and we just sort of sat there filming, which is
bearing witness instead of bearing witness is the larger hug in that way, chronicling it for time. Yeah. I'm going to, I wanted to get in, there's 3 or so questions that I want to, and we're at 6:50. Let's start up with Mary. What was most surprising to you about the trajectories of the students' paths from freshmen to seniors? What surprised you the most?
What do you think?
I think that if I look back to my own freshman year where I was not challenged with those advantages and you might call it political correctness, and certainly it's arguably gone a little far sometimes at some schools. But at Cornell, when I was an undergraduate, there was really almost nothing of that. And so the surprise to me was how I had not changed all that much in that freshman year, at least in my own recollection, but that how profound and foregrounded these questions of self-examination were in that freshman dorm. I mean, it's not that anyone's journey was surprising to me, it's that they all were surprising to me. And I remember the staff of the dorm made up t-shirts for the resident advisors, the college seniors who were like the dorm supervisors, and we had them too. And it says Trankos, and then on the back it said that the life that is unexamined is not worth living.
It's like, and then it was Plato or something,
right.
You know, whoever said that. But yeah, but that was that was sort of the slogan of the year. But I think, well, in some cases, what was shocking to me was how prescient some of them were. Like Sam basically laid out his entire, I mean, we didn't know it when we were filming at FROSH year. We asked each of them, like, you know, what do you see for yourself 4 years from now? And Sam laid it all out there, and he even laid out what he was going to be doing after school, and he became a basketball coach. And, you know, Scott was kind of the same. And then other people like, you know, Debbie, for whom it was important to become part of a sorority, you know, and then by the time she's a senior, she's found feminist studies and she's left her sorority. And then there's Monique, who is such a triumph, you know, and continues to be so today. So,
by the way, I see in the chat, because our PhD friend Dawn
exactly
corrected us about it wasn't Plato. It was that other philosopher that called Socrates. Is that how you say it? No,
well, didn't
it's
Plato,
Socrates.
But didn't Plato say it for Socrates?
Right.
Yeah. Okay, we've got two other, Ken W. Did being with the students help you feel better about your own freshman insecurities? Dan, you kind of just were touching on that, like you were more normal than you thought.
Oh, I wouldn't say normal. I just don't think I had changed all that much across that freshman year. But what it did show me is that college is a hell of a lot more fun if you can go and not have to take classes where you have to have exams and be graded. I mean, I had a great time shooting FROSH. It's like, this is the best of both worlds.
I actually found myself, you know, one of the things that I found really moving was all of the intellectual discussions that went on really continuously. And you see some of those in the film. And I found myself, because as a student, I tried to study, but I also was very distracted by all the social things that were going on. There were a lot of times when the students would be talking about books that I hadn't actually read, and they would be complaining about reading them. And I would be like, can I borrow that? So, you know, I think I said this to Davia earlier, that I never did an all-nighter as an undergraduate, but I did many all-nighters when we filmed FROSH.
We only have 5 minutes left, and I wanted to ask you to just tell people what you're working on now. What are you making now? What's next?
We are making a film all about Leonard Cohen and the song Hallelujah, and looking at Leonard's life through that prism of that song, everything that might have gone into Leonard's life to make that song, and the arc of that song itself, from a record label reject to this international hymn. And Bill Weber, who's in this session now too, is editing with us. It's sort of a three-headed edit right now. Dayna had done a lot of the first cut, most of the first cut, but now it's a little three-headed operation. And Bill also cut the Galapagos Affair for us. And so it's amazing that he's sitting here watching us now after we Zoomed earlier and talked and edited all day.
But so the goal is, for that film, the goal is to have that finished and ready to go out in the world next fall. COVID hopefully being like conquered by vaccinations, and movie theaters still surviving. Yeah.
What's the through line between FROSH to Hallelujah and the Galapagos and Ballet Russe and something was ventured? What are you looking for? How do you know that, okay, this is the film, this is the story we need to tell now, and we need to make a film about that?
That is such a, I was gonna say that's such a good question, and we, in a way, because there isn't an obvious through line from one, like from the beginning of our work on Isadora Duncan through Hallelujah, it's made it harder for us to actually get funding, because people, in this world, I think people want you to fit into a category and they want you to repeat yourself to a certain extent. So what would be the through line?
Well, for me, it's that if the people, the subjects, the characters, whatever you want to call them, are thoughtful, are fascinating, kind of, you think that they'll hold the screen, are introspective enough to have thought through things, are extroverted enough to be able to articulate things, and that have lived or are living through something that has some interest. It's the core of any good movie or any good book. Or a good play. It's that we're following the characters on a journey, and if the characters are really interesting and are open in a really fundamental way, then I'm on board. And that's why subject matter doesn't matter so much as it is the life of the characters themselves.
Although I would say, I would say I have something a little more selfish that goes into my choices, which is when you start one of these projects, you're in it for years, and it's not something that you just launch into blithely, thinking you're going to launch in and waltz in and waltz out, and even as short as a year. It's usually like we've been working on the Hallelujah one for 6 years now. So my questions that I ask myself are, do I want to spend time in that world with those people? Can I learn something from it? And can I possibly, offer up something as well from my whatever my perspective will be?
I just saw Lucy Gray, dear friend Lucy, just described the film. She got it. It takes someone else to say these things. You make films about people becoming themselves, about their creative blossoming.
Aww.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's what we do.
And actually, honestly, since Lucy just wrote that in, I have to credit a dinner that we had with Lucy and David Thompson, her husband. David actually, in the midst of that dinner 6 years ago, said, "Have you ever considered doing a documentary about a song?" And my initial reaction was, "Ooh, I don't know. How would one do a documentary about a song?" And then before that dinner was over, it was like, "Oh, I know the song, Hallelujah." And so that was the nugget of that film. So of that project. So basically, but a lot of it is, we're just kind of going through life, and then someone asks a question about, have you considered doing a documentary about a song? Or a friend hired us to go to the Galapagos Islands to do camera and sound on his project, and while we were there, we stumbled upon this unbelievable murder mystery that wasn't solved. And then got obsessed with it. And then a few years later, that same friend who'd hired us to do the sound work and the camera work called us and said, "Hey, that murder mystery that you guys were obsessed by? I just found out that there's footage from the 1930s. So, things just kind of, all of our projects, we've just sort of.
We never set out with a master plan for a career or what we would do.
Yeah.
Elvis Presley said, "Put yourself in the path of discovery." And I think of you two as being in the path of discovery, definitely. It's killing me because we promised the Roxie we'd end at 7 and we have another clip, and Jean Finley asked a question that's pulling us back towards the film. I'm gonna, forgive me, Lex, I'm going back on my word. Can you give Jean Finley a 20-second, what aspect of competitivism was important to your film? If Stanford's a highly competitive place, how did competition factor into your film?
I think it amped up the pressure, and anything under pressure tends to distend or or burst. So it would, whatever was happening in the school itself in terms of their classes, I think would have sort of rattled them, because a lot of these students, there was one professor who would talk to us quietly about knocking the high school out of them. It was his job. That they were under pressure, so they were rattled, they were more emotional and more vulnerable. And I think what's particular to a school like, let's see, where the parrot in the background, what's particular to a school like Stanford, which is a pressure cooker, is you are going to get people who are more driven and probably, and I count myself certainly among this, a little more subject to being verbal, because that sense of being articulate and being a person of words does tend to go along with going to a four-year residential college.
Okay, this is killing me. It's 7:02 and the Roxie. I just want to thank Jean Finley saying thank you. This group of people that's gathered tonight, thank you all for coming. Diana Fuller, happy birthday tomorrow. Here's to you, and all that's ahead and all that's behind and all that's right now. Give it a name. And Dan and Dayna, wishing you so well with the next film. I was trying to imagine somebody knocking the high school out of Leonard Cohen. Like, what would that mean?
You'll find out. It sort of did happen.
Yeah, but
But can we show the last clip just as a rollout?
Yes, that's our plan. So
also one thing that I think we found out just before, when we were just meeting to get ready for this, is that this was recorded, and I believe that for anyone who wants to see the films and hasn't yet seen them, or tell your friends, you can see the films up for another week till the 21st, and this Q&A is gonna, I think, also be up on the Roxie site.
Yes, it is.
Yes. All right. So lovely to see everyone.
And thank you, Davia, for being a great moderator, and to set up this rollout, the clip that we'll leave you all with. It's Monique at senior year, and you can see one of the reasons that beyond her own coming to terms with how smart and powerful she is, one of the reasons why she made it through those years and was on a good path afterward. We're rolling.
Thank you.
This is my girl. We're so proud of her now.
Betty, I'm so tired
Get your
today.
hand out your face. We're still working with her, as you can see.
How did Monique come to work at the Haas Center?
We had an opening for a student worker. And we got her in, and she didn't want to be there. She did not want to be there. Monique, have you faxed before?
No, am about to learn?
Yeah. But she stuck it out. She stayed there.
What do you think went into that?
What do I think went into that? A lot of pushing her and telling her, yes, you can, yes, you can, yes, you can. A lot of talking to her, yelling at her, fussing at her, but talking a lot about her life and where she's been and where she wants to go.
This offer comes through, I think.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Love you all.
Wonderful.
Thank you, Davia, for doing such a good job.
Oh, thank you all. And to the Roxie Theater, long may you wave. We'll be there for the premiere of Leonard Cohen. I'm your high school.
Absolutely.
All right. Bye, you all.